the critical press coverage, and you know, when they had the Amendment Number 1 vote back in April, there was a lot of discussion about, you know, why it passed here and failed there. One of the things that hit me was that it passed every place.
One of the reasons why we came all the way up to Shreveport was that we were interested in North Louisiana, because sometimes it doesn't get the coverage. So let me start off right with there. A lot of times when people talk about Louisiana politics, they talk about New Orleans, and they talk about the colorful Acadiana part of Louisiana. They don't talk very much about North Louisiana. Why not?
Well, I think there's several reasons for that. One is that in the last 50 years, the population in North Louisiana has been steadily declining as a percentage of the state's total population, so that the great voting majority and population majority now is in South Louisiana. I think another reason is that politics in North Louisiana have generally not been as colorful. Perhaps it's not as intense, it's not as partisan as politics in the southern part of the state. And then in North Louisiana, we do not have the interest in state politics, I think, as much as the people in South Louisiana do. Although I think there is a higher level of interest here in national politics.
Is North Louisiana more part of other parts of the region than the rest of the state?
Well, North Louisiana is more like what we think of traditionally as the South. It's basically Protestant, Anglo-Saxon culture, whereas, as you know, South Louisiana is very strongly influenced by the French Catholic ethnic, and as a result, North Louisiana is probably more like you would find in East Texas or Arkansas or Mississippi or Georgia, Alabama, more the traditional southern makeup of population.
When we talk to people in the south part of the state, New Orleans, they have a distinct view of North Louisiana. Are you aware of the way that the North Louisianans are thought of by the rest of the state?
Well, when I was in the legislature, we were always referred to as the country by people in New Orleans. The legislators from the New Orleans metropolitan area always looked at the state as being divided into two parts, New Orleans and the country parishes. I think probably there is less knowledge of North Louisiana in the Baton Rouge, New Orleans corridor than is desirable for a state. I think they've always sort of viewed their area self-sufficient, and they're not the natural commerce enterprise between that area and North Louisiana, as North Louisiana might look to New Orleans and Baton Rouge, particularly as the state capital, the largest city in the state.
For the average person on the street, if I was to walk the streets of Minden, or perhaps Natchitoches, or maybe even Shreveport, and I'd ask them, what do you think of politicians from Acadia or from New Orleans? What kind of responses might I get?
Well, colorful would be right at the top of the list. I think probably there might be a little suspicious of them simply because they would be different from the politicians in North Louisiana. But I think that same situation might be in reverse. The South Louisiana average citizen might look with some suspicion on the North Louisiana politician also. I think former Governor Edwards, of course, was really the first so-called Cajun politician to have a large following in North Louisiana, to be widely known. Most of the governors have been from North Louisiana, as you know, going back to Huey Long. So we really haven't had the intimate knowledge of the real South Louisiana politician just among the average citizens in North Louisiana.
I want to get back to this theme in a second, but you touched on something I wanted to talk to you about. There's so much discussion of South Louisiana nationally and New Orleans nationally, but so many of the governors came from right around here. Can you tell us which governors came around here and why, and incorporate into that the fact that it's strange that people don't cover the state that much with that?
Well, you can go back to 1944 with Governor Davis, who was from Shreveport, and he was succeeded by Governor Long from north central Louisiana, and he was succeeded by Governor Kennon from northwest Louisiana, and Then Governor Long came back, and Governor Davis came back. Then John McKithen, who was from north central Louisiana, and then Governor Edwards, and Governor Roma is from northwest Louisiana. So that, with the exception, I guess, of the 12 years of Governor Edwards and the 4 years of Governor Treen, in the last 60 years, the governors have been from Louisiana for 40 out of the 60 years.
So is it ironic that all
Sorry, that
been
North
from North
Yeah.
Louisiana? Yeah.
We're gonna need to get the
Yeah.
restate.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Why don't ask you that question and incorporate that question into your answer?
Yeah.
Why do you think, with so little attention from the outside of the state focused on this part of the state, that North Louisiana produces all the governors?
I think one reason is that politics in North.
Sorry, one reason that.
One reason that North Louisiana produces so many.
Yeah, all right. One reason that North Louisiana produces so many of the governors is that politics in North Louisiana is not nearly as partisan as it is in South Louisiana. You can rise to the top politically without creating these permanent enemies, the people who are going to be opposed to you because you represent a particular faction. And then I think another aspect of that is the fact that you don't have the built-in partisan groups. The person who rises to the top politically in North Louisiana has had to do so much of it himself. He's had to have the personality, the ability to work politically as an individual, as distinguished between working through an organization or a party, that he develops a lot of political skills that help him move to the top politically. And I think the governors who come from North Louisiana have certainly been people with a lot of political charisma, people with an ability to meet other citizens on a one-on-one basis, to be a good handshaker, to move easily through crowds. Certainly governors Jimmy Davis and John McKithen, Bob Kennan were people of great personal charisma and a great ability to meet people one-on-one politically to great advantage. And I think a lot of that was because of the environment they came from.
Now, I'm not missing your point, but if you went down to South Louisiana, people would tell us the same thing. The successful politicians are good people, they shake the hands, they're close to the folks. Can you be more specific, though, about why those South Louisiana politicians have a harder time rising up?
I don't mean to say that the political leaders in South Louisiana don't have a great deal of charisma, because they do. But generally, they come from an environment where there's a great deal of political partisanship. There's a certain percentage of people in your constituency who will be automatically opposed to anything that you might be for because you're for it. You came from a different political faction than they did. You start off with a certain built-in negatives because of the more highly partisan nature of politics in South Louisiana.
That's good. Now let's go back to the dichotomy between the parts of the state. There's a religious difference between North Louisiana and South Louisiana, and some people would look at the Catholic South part of the state and see it not only a religious difference but also a lifestyle difference. Do you think that average voter on the streets of Minden or Ruston or whatever, when they look at South Louisiana, not only see a different type of politician, but there's a questioning of the morality or the political morality of other parts of the state?
There may be some of that, but I feel that it has greatly diminished since the presidency of John Kennedy. I can remember back in the races for governor of Mayor Morrison of New Orleans, where in the late 50s and the early 60s, that his religion, being from the city of New Orleans, was a major liability in North Louisiana. I think ever since John Kennedy put to rest the Catholic issue at the national level, that the issue of religion in North Louisiana, looking at South Louisiana as a largely Catholic area, I don't think that's nearly as important as it was 25 years ago.
For coverage of the North, I want to just finish up with this. A lot of times, when you read the New York Times, you read the Washington Post, the LA Times, the national reporters will come into the state and they'll write a lot about the colorful politics of Louisiana. Okay, they fly into New Orleans, but they very seldom write anything about anything north of Baton Rouge, even if they get to Baton Rouge. What do you think is happening? Why do national politics, political coverage not include the north part of the state?
Well, I think that's probably because the people who write those stories are largely based in the New Orleans area.
We need to get a question on this one.
Yeah.
So why do you think national reporters, and these are not only the ones in New Orleans, people that come in, seldom write about anything outside of the New Orleans area?
My feeling is because
We have to start with some repetition of the question. Why do national political reporters not cover much in the state besides the New Orleans area?
So national reporters don't cover much.
National reporters do a much better job of covering Louisiana politics from the southern part of the state viewpoint than they do in North Louisiana. That's a fact. I think the main reason for that is that the reporters either fly into New Orleans to do their stories or they're permanently based there. There will be at least 3, probably 5 Louisiana-based news stories in the New York Times every week. It leads me to believe they have someone in New Orleans who is either a stringer or a full-time correspondent of the New York Times, and obviously they're going to pick up and write about those things that are within their area. There's not any reason for a major newspaper or news magazine to have a full-time office or staffer or maybe even a stringer in North Louisiana.
Do you think it has something to do with the lure, if it's just more interesting for those national reporters to stay in New Orleans?
Well, the city of New Orleans is internationally famous. It is a internationally recognized major metropolitan area of color and substance and news. I think it's only natural and normal that news coverage is going to, for Louisiana, is going to be dominated by what you see and hear in that city.
So you would agree with the theory that if a reporter comes in, they may stay closer to the restaurants than they do the rest of the state?
They're also staying closer to the major population center of the state. If you were a reporter for the Associated Press covering New York State, you're going to do most of your coverage from New York City. You're not going to be too concerned really about what takes place in Binghamton. And I think that's true of the larger metropolitan area in any place in the country, not just Louisiana.
Okay.
Can I ask
Sure.
a question to follow up to
When you listen to
Let me think about that one just a minute. In looking at the difference in North Louisiana and South Louisiana from the effect of the religious difference, I think there is a difference. North Louisiana is part of the traditional Southern Bible Belt, where views on moral issues, social issues are largely influenced by the outlook of the prevalent Protestant church in North Louisiana. That's not true in South Louisiana. It is a culture that's predominantly influenced by the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church views on many issues are different from those in the Bible Belt areas of North Louisiana. For that reason, the views toward whether gambling should be legalized has a difference in viewpoint from North and South Louisiana. What's interesting right now is that the polls indicate, however, that there is something of a statewide consensus in favor of a lottery, whereas historically it would have been accepted that North Louisiana would have been against it because it's a form of a game of chance. So perhaps the current polls on the lottery indicate that there's even more coming together now and less difference between the outlook on issues of gambling or games of chance between the northern and southern parts of the state than previously existed.
Is the state coming together because of the economic downturn in the whole state?
I don't know whether it's the lottery polls indicate a coming together of the state because of economic reasons, or perhaps it's also just a more and more acceptance of the idea of a lottery. When people read in the paper about somebody in Florida or Illinois winning $30 million, may fantasize themselves, if we had that in Louisiana, I might win $30 million, and maybe that's the most important possibility that could happen.
Talking about just the connection between Shreveport and New Orleans, you said there used to be a lot of travel in between those two that doesn't exist anymore. Can you describe what that used to be? And
Yes, you can go back to the 1950s, and there was a great deal of transportation and social intercourse between Shreveport and New Orleans. There were 5 passenger trains a day from Shreveport to New Orleans and back. There were 6 major airline schedules each day between Shreveport and New Orleans. The highways weren't very good, but they weren't very good anywhere. If you were an average middle-class Shreveporter, you made 1 or 2 shopping trips a year to New Orleans. By contrast, the last 20 years have been no passenger trains, have been severe reduction in airline schedules, very poor highways. At the same time, by Interstate 20, you can be at North Park Shopping Center in Dallas in just 3 hours. If you're the average middle-class citizen in Shreveport, today you go to Dallas for the weekend and go shopping. If you're looking for specialized medical care, you no longer go to New Orleans. If you can't get it in Shreveport, you go to Houston. So that there has been, I think, a widening of the social and economic intercourse between North Louisiana, as represented certainly by Shreveport and New Orleans, with that movement being in the direction of Dallas. You can go to any shopping center in Shreveport, for example, and buy each day the Dallas morning papers or the Houston Chronicle. Very difficult to find a New Orleans or Baton Rouge paper here. Our news media are serving a tri-state area. That is, they've got as many viewers on television in Texas and southern Arkansas as they have in Louisiana. The result is that the news media is telling you what's taking place in Austin, and it's telling you what's taking place in Little Rock, and it's telling you what's taking place in Shreveport, in Baton Rouge. You don't get the in-depth Louisiana news coverage that you would get if you lived in New Orleans or Baton Rouge or Lafayette and watching television news there or reading the morning papers. And it just makes economic sense. If you own a television station in Shreveport and half of your viewers in East Texas, you're going to make certain that to retain those viewers, you're going to give them a significant amount of East Texas news.
it's even hard to get a New Orleans paper up here. You told us about why even getting Sunday paper isn't very worthwhile up here.
I enjoy watching and keeping up with football, and on fall I go down to the major newsstand downtown and buy some Sunday papers. I do not buy the Sunday Times-Picayune, even though it's available there, because it's the edition that comes out early Saturday morning and has no football coverage. It has very limited sports coverage in the edition that comes out early Saturday. Whereas I can even buy the Sunday New York Times and get the Saturday football scores at the same newsstand by 9:30 Sunday morning. So the attraction of keeping up with the political news in New Orleans by buying a Picayune is more than offset by the fact that I can't keep up with the Saturday football scores.
You've written a chapter about the governors that you've known in the last 40 years. We're very interested in the cycles of Louisiana politics. That you tend to get a very colorful politician, many times a populist politician, and then something happens 4 years later and you get a reform politician, and then 4 years later you seem to have a cycle going back and forth. I want you to talk a little bit about some of the governors and try to incorporate what was going on, why you have this cycle back and forth. Your family or your father was anti-Long, and you have some things to say about Sam Jones. But Sam Jones seemed to have some lacking in terms of his political sense. What I'd like you to do is to give us a statement about what your family was like on the Long, anti-Long tradition, and what was Sam Jones' problem as a politician.
Before we do that, I'm going to
Switch tape. What I was looking for in your chapter were things you said about different people that illustrate some points about general politics. And we have lots of people talking about the contrast between the colorful governors and less colorful governors, which many times...
Tell me when you're ready to start.
Yeah, we're all ready.
All right. When I was growing up, everyone in Shreveport, and I guess for that matter in the state of Louisiana, was either identified as a Long or anti-Long. My family was identified in the Annie Long faction, and I guess that was true probably of 95% of the people in the business community in Shreveport. Sam Jones, who served as governor from 1940 to 1944, was, I guess, one of the heroes of the Annie Long group at the period coming at the end of the Louisiana scandals in the late 1930s. Governor Jones was, in my opinion, the governor who had the finest intellectual grasp of the state of any governor that we've had. He was a real student of Louisiana, could discuss knowingly not only the law but geography, politics, climate, demographics. He had a problem, however, in implementing his programs in that Governor Jones was probably the poorest politician of our modern governors. He had the least amount of political background at the time he became governor. The only elected office that Governor Jones had prior to being elected as governor was as a member of the Constitutional Convention of 1921 from Beauregard Parish. And as a result, he had problems with the legislature early on and had a difficulty in translating some of the visions for Louisiana that came from his intellectual grasp of the state, because he simply did not have the political ability to implement those in a state that had a very highly partisan political atmosphere.
In terms of political personality then, in one sentence, you're going from Earl Long's administration to Sam Jones' administration. One sentence, political personality. How did Sam Jones differ from the Longs?
Sam Jones was more aloof in his personality. He did not have that gregarious ability to meet people and mingle easily in a crowd that had been characteristic of the Longs.
In the cycle of Louisiana politics, why do you have this cycle of colorful characters, populists, and then reform, and then populists back and forth? It seems very schizophrenic.
I think historically it goes back to two factors. For so long we had the constitutional prohibition of a governor succeeding himself, so that the governor changed every 4 years. And what we were having in the 40s, in the 50s, and the 60s was we would have 4 years of a Long governor, then the pendulum would swing the other way and we would have an anti-Long governor. And the anti-Long governor generally represented politically the opposite of everything that the Long governor did, so that the swing really was more Long, anti-Long than it was populist or anti-populist. And I think to some extent that tradition has carried on into the 70s and 80s, not Long, anti-Long, but we've had the colorful, populist appearing governor, and after he's been there a while, the pendulum swings the other way, and people want the quiet, orderly, don't bother type of government. I think it's somewhat similar at the national level to the Arthur Schlesinger theory that the national government is 20 years of activism and 10 years of passive approach, and I think no longer is it Long, anti-Long, but it's sort of the same thing. After a certain period of active government, people want a kind of a quiet, passive period to catch their breath and recoup. And as I said, that's the same theory of the national political scene, and maybe we just localized it a little bit with a little more colorful personalities.
Jimmy Davis was from Shreveport. You knew Jimmy Davis. They had the premiere of the film Louisiana up here in fall of 1947. Did you find that strange that a Louisiana sitting governor would have a film about his own career?
I don't know that it was strange that Governor Davis was making motion pictures while he was governor, but it certainly was not politically popular. Governor Long, who was beginning to mount his 1948 gubernatorial election, certainly made a great deal of it politically, that Governor Davis was out of the state during a period in the post-war period when there was so much growth and activity and demand for governmental services, and the image was conveyed that Governor Davis was ignoring his job as governor in order to make motion pictures. And Governor Davis's defense, he felt like this was creating some good national publicity for the state and through his performance on films.
Governor Long had a very colorful way of putting things. I'm going to ask for several descriptions of some of the things that he said. How did he describe Sam Jones, incorporating a question Governor Long described Sam Jones as?
Well, he described him in a lot of ways. One of the
Can you start with Earl Long described Sam Jones?
Earl Long had a colorful way of describing all of his political enemies. I guess one of the images that he put on Governor Jones was High Hat Sam, the high society kid, highfalutin Sam that squirts perfume under his arms. If you've seen the current movie Blaze, you may see that that line is used by Paul Newman in his role as Earl Long, but it's ascribed to the congressman that he was running against in 1960 rather than the original statement which was applied to Governor Jones.
Do you remember other politicians and the way Governor Long described them?
Well, he had a way of ridiculing his opponents. Mayor Morrison of New Orleans, who was his opponent in the 1956 governor's race, he always referred to him as de la Soups. His actual name was, it's a good French name, de lesseps, but he was de la Soups, and he would make references to him having a toupee, referring to a hairpiece, and make references to his $400 suits, when actually Mayor Morrison did not care very much about expensive clothes and generally wore
Whoops. Well,
Huh.
spirit of Earl there.
yeah.
I guess Earl didn't want that particular question.
Yeah.
All right, we gotta let it cool down just for a sec.
And replace the light bulb. So fine.
I think one of the biggest challenges to the reform political leaders has been to maintain contact with their constituency after they are elected. And I'm not saying that all of them have lost contact with their constituencies, but I think they have done a much poorer job of keeping up with their constituencies after they have been elected, certainly than the political leadership that was reflected by the Longs. That political leadership made a full-time job of staying in touch with the people of Louisiana, both before and after the elections. And I think sometimes the people who are elected on a reform basis become so enamored of the idea of political reform itself that, that they lose contact with the people that elected them, and you can't do that and achieve lasting reform.
Why would the reformers not be able to do that and the populists, the colorful politicians, take
Well, perhaps that's because the colorful politicians, as represented by the Long groups, are people who are in politics all their lives. They love politics. They want to stay in politics. They know that the way you stay in politics is to stay in touch with the way people are thinking. So often the people who have been elected in Louisiana on a reform basis do become so caught up in the process of government itself, and it's easy to do that. I know I've been guilty of that myself, that you lose the concept, the approach, the necessity of reflecting continually that shifting public opinion out there if you want to be a long-time political operator and make permanent changes in the way that things are done.
Even in an area like Shreveport, which has a reputation of being more conservative than the rest of the state, I would expect that local officials here found that their electorates had expectations of them because of the populist tradition. The government was expected to do more, the people expected more out of their local officials. But a lot of people have told us that things have changed. How does a politician today deal with the fact that people's expectations of what the government can do for them, and maybe as little as in Acadia Parish as people have their driveways, put shells down. How does a politician deal with the expectations as compared to the realities of limits today?
Can we stop a minute?
Sure.
To really...
The Republican Party in Louisiana, to an extent, was born in Shreveport. Using the Shreveport area and the conservative nature of the national orientation of politics here, has the Republican Party in Louisiana been reborn, and has that changed the politics of the state?
The Republican Party has historically been a strong political, could we start this over
Sure.
again? Republican voter sentiment has historically been very strong in the Shreveport area. This was true back before it became a popular thing to register Republicans. Shreveport gave a pretty strong vote for Tom Dewey back running against Franklin Roosevelt. Shreveport gave Richard Nixon his greatest percentage of vote turnout, vote support in 1960 of any parish or county in the United States. Shreveport has a very conservative voting trend on national issues. As a result, it's been fairly reasonable to expect that as Republican voter registration, Republicans running for public office under the Republican label has become more acceptable in Louisiana, due largely to the open primary system. The Republican Party has been electing people to public office at the local basis very regularly. 3 of the 7 members of our city council are Republican. There are Republicans on the parish governing body, the Caddo Parish School Board, and much of this, I think, is a reflection of the fact that on national politics, and that's the way people sort of identify themselves as Democrats or Republicans, this is a very conservative area that's very Republican-oriented.
And has that changed politics here?
It has not changed it as much as people would have thought when we were talking about 25 years ago the advantages of a two-party political system as constituting a system of checks and balances. It's my opinion that the open primary, which allows Democrats and Republicans to run in the same election, has diminished the importance of the party label, because it's diminished party discipline.
Now you have an area here, Shreveport, it's conservative. You have a religious difference, you know, it seemed to be Baptist, Bible Belt, much more like the rest of the South. How then do you explain the appeal of a colorful, flamboyant politician like an Edwin Edwards to anybody up here?
Well, Governor Edwards was a man of great personal charisma. And it was a type of charisma, I think, that and intelligence that transcended geography or religion or any other aspect. Although this was not one of his great, strong areas in the early part of his career as governor, he worked at making friends in Shreveport on a personal basis. He certainly mastered all of the local political issues and could talk about them very knowledgeably. And I think his strength and popularity in this area, when he was strong and popular statewide, was based on the factors of his personality and his ability to master the local problems. At the same time, when his popularity began to diminish statewide, it probably diminished even more in northwest Louisiana.
Okay, let's stop for 1 second. What I was going to ask you, okay, you have a very conservative area, very conservative voters, and you've got this Cajun politician who is very freewheeling, gambles in Las Vegas, is legendary for his personal life or supposed personal life. How can he get any votes here at all?
Well, let me give you one little story that might illustrate it. It could be magnified many times, but during his first 2 terms as governor, an opportunity came for Shreveport to locate a major manufacturing plant to build General Motors automobiles, a plant which is now in operation, has some 2,700 well-paid employees. When this project was in the balance, a delegation of Shreveporters went down to see Governor Edwards and said, to get this plant, there are certain things we have to have. The governor spread a map out on the table and looked at that map like he'd been doing this all of his life, and he seemed to know the topography. He seemed to know exactly which street needed to be made here, the fact that there was an overpass over the railroad that needed to be made in another location. He spoke knowledgeably about it, just as though he lived in Shreveport all of his life. He said, this we can do, this we can't do. And the things that he said we can do made the difference in bringing a General Motors plant to Shreveport. Now, when a governor can bring you 2,700 jobs, you really find yourself a lot less interested in what his political philosophy is, or what his religion is, or what his lifestyle is. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that Governor Edwards mastered his knowledge of the local scene and was responsive to request for things from this community that made a difference in the quality of life and the economic well-being of the community.
What can you ask from a politician?
That's right.
I mean, really?
Well, I got my list done.
That's fine. Yeah.
Louis, anything?
I just, while we're talking about this, the fella is so smart. His ability to retain all kinds of minutiae in his mind. He came up here when he was running for office, and he was going to talk to a group, and I happened to be there. One of his friends said, "Governor, there's a certain highway out here that Mayor Hussey is getting ready to pave, and it's going to go down here," and said, "It would be a good thing for you just to tell this audience that you would think it would be a good idea to support that." And that's all he was told. I mean, I heard what he was told. And he got up in this group and sometime in his speech said, "Now I know y'all are planning to extend this river parkway, but he said, you know, you're not thinking big enough. You need to extend it further. You need to take it down 70th Street and to extend it on around that river bend." I mean, he held his arm up. If you lived in Shreveport, you could visualize that road going around that river bend. And then after you get around that river bend, you need to head it on further south. And he said, "You're just not thinking big enough, and if I get elected governor, I'll help you get that project done." Well, it wasn't that he just came up like any politician, said, "Yeah, I understand y'all doing that project, and I'll support." The guy's up there doing his arm, you're living in Shreveport, and you're taking that road, around that river bend, you know? I mean, and the guy, just his ability to seem to know so much about your community was just really impressive.
Do you think there was a certain vicarious thrill that some people got off of, on not only the fact that he was that smart, but that he had that kind of lifestyle?
Probably, because he was consistent with it. When he came, he did not try to change it when he came to Shreveport. When he would talk to banquets, he would make jokes about his relationships with women, and everybody would kind of self-consciously laugh, but he didn't try to change that image of his personality because he was in Shreveport.
He was not a hypocrite.
No.
That seems to be one of the most amazing things, because a lot of politicians gamble and cheat and
Yeah.
run around,
Yeah, right.
but Edwin Edwards always wore it like a badge.
That's right.
And, yeah, so what you see is what you get.
That's right. The thing that always amazed me was the fact that he tells some of those jokes about, or stories about the so-called women chasing, with his wife sitting there in the dais next to him, you know.
Well, you know that joke about, I was at the Baton Rouge Press Club, and
I probably is what we've covered, and that is the fact that to realize how much this area of the state particularly is oriented toward East Texas, and particularly the Dallas metropolitan area, and really how little we know about what goes on down there, and the need for us to just be sitting here looking like maybe we're talking. We don't want to talk, do we?